Hey everyone, you're watching We Had That, and today I'm going to talk about the 1982 Eagle Force Wild Bill action figure by Mego. I still remember seeing a commercial for the Eagle Force figures as a little kid and thinking how cool they looked. I definitely saw the commercial before I had heard anything about the new Real American Hero line of G.I. Joe action figures, so at the time, there was really nothing like Eagle Force in the stores. The commercial played relatively often for a while during the cartoons that I watched, and I got to the point that I really wanted these figures. However, when I finally saw them on the pegs at Lionel Leisure City, I was surprised and disappointed that they were much smaller than the 3 3/4 inch height that most action figures were at the time. Ever since Star Wars figures arrived in the 3 3/4 inch size, that had pretty much become the standard, and that's what I had expected for Eagle Force as well. The Eagle Force figures were closer to 2 3/4 to maybe 3 inches, and at the time, they didn't fit in with any other action figure on the market. As a side note, although when they came out, Eagle Force figures were the only figures in that size, two more lines in that size arrived later in the 80s, Mask and Dino Riders. So eventually, the Eagle Force figures weren't alone in that size. Although I was disappointed by the fact that the Eagle Force figures weren't in scale with my other action figures, I still liked the premise enough that I picked up a few of the figures anyway. As a kid, I assumed the reason they were smaller was based on cost. Since Eagle Force figures were die-cast metal, I thought it was just cheaper to make them smaller. It turns out the actual reason for the size, and probably the reason that Eagle Force was even created in the first place, was that the toy company who made the Eagle Force figures, Mego, had recently acquired the molds for a bunch of old Marx vehicles and playsets that were originally sold with those little plastic army men. They were too small for the 3 3/4 inch figures, so from what I've read, it seems that Mego decided to create an entirely new line of action figures specifically to go along with these vehicles and playsets in the smaller scale. When the figures were originally pitched to be manufactured, the line was going to be called the Screaming Eagles, and Captain Eagle was going to be Captain Claw. At some point, the name was changed to Eagle Force, and Captain Claw became Captain Eagle, so that's what we eventually got. After picking up my first few figures, I definitely wanted more. All of the characters in the line were pictured in the form of line art drawings on the back of the package, and I made notes about which figures I wanted, which was probably most of the ones that I didn't have. Over the months, I was able to find most of them, and many of them were at closeout prices. But there were 5 figures I never saw as a kid: Nemesis, Baron Von Chill, Sergeant Brown, Red Wing, and Wild Bill. When eBay came along, I was finally able to complete my collection by adding the missing 5 figures. One of those 5 figures, Wild Bill, was the team's cowboy. Interestingly, in the early 1980s, the Western genre was kind of at a low point. Sure, as kids we'd seen reruns of Bonanza, which had ended in the early 70s, but continued on in syndication for years. But the cowboy wasn't as iconic of a character as it had been in the previous several decades. However, I suspect that the guys creating the Eagle Force characters had grown up with plenty of the biggest Western movies around, and that the tropes still held a lot of sentimental value for them. In addition to the cowboy hat, the Wild Bill figure had a bandana around his neck, brown cowboy boots, and a pair of 6-shooters on his hips, Lone Ranger style. He was absolutely a generic cowboy in every way except for his gold uniform and the fact that his accessory was an M16 rifle. Since the Eagle Force line was filled with stereotypes, Wild Bill fit right in. A year or two after I got my Eagle Force figures, I started playing with the new line of 3 3/4 inch G.I. Joe figures. Like several of the other characters from the Eagle Force, Wild Bill had a close counterpart on the G.I. Joe team. The Wave 2 helicopter pilot, also named Wild Bill. Both were the Team Cowboy, complete with cowboy hat and a pair of six-shooters. I really don't think that either character was based on the other. I think it was probably just a case of two stereotypical characters added to military teams that came around about the same time. After all, the name Wild Bill for a cowboy is a pretty basic idea anyway. Because the Eagle Force figures were created specifically for this line of toys, they weren't based off of any movie or TV show. We knew nothing about these characters beyond what we'd seen in the commercials or read on the packaging for the figures. To help kids have an idea about who these characters were, Mego came up with the idea of including a one-page comic on the back of each package to tell a quick story about each character. In the comic on the back of Wild Bill's package, his jet is shot down and troops working for the enemy Nemesis try to take him prisoner. When they tell him to hand over his pistols, he acts like he's going to hand them over, then spins them around and starts shooting. He can also be seen using a lasso and riding a camel like it's a horse. There was also a description of each figure's weapon at the end of each comic. The Wild Bill figure came with an M16A1. Not only is this a real weapon, but the version pictured on the back of the figure's package and the accessory itself both looked pretty accurate. The M16A1 replaced the M16 in the 1960s and was basically an improved model based on feedback of how the M16 worked in combat situations in Vietnam. Several of the Eagle Force figures and Grunt from the G.I. Joe line were armed with M16s. I wonder if the designers were former military and had used them back when they served. I'm curious to hear what you think of Wild Bill. Did you have a Wild Bill action figure when you were a kid? What did you think of him back then? What do you think of him now? Was he a favorite hero of yours, or did he spend most of his time out on the range? Tell me in the comments below. Also, please give this video a thumbs up, and if you have a chance, it would be great if you would share it on social media. If you enjoy my content, please subscribe to my channel and hit that notifications bell so you'll know when I post new videos. As always, thanks for watching.